She looked me dead in the eye, raised her glass in front of everyone at that fancy rooftop dinner, and said loud enough for half the tables to hear, "I want a prenup. I'm not risking my future on you." Some people laughed, others glanced at me with pity, like I had just been checked into the boards at a hockey game. I nodded slowly, smiling like it was the smartest idea I'd ever heard. What nobody at that table knew, what she didn't know, was that she had just walked straight into the trap she set for me. Before I tell you the rest, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and leave a comment, because you won't believe where this story goes. The night had all the markings of a celebration. We were at one of those overpriced rooftop restaurants in Chicago that boasted about their view like it was part of the meal. The skyline glittered against the evening sky. Skyscrapers lit up like jewels scattered on black velvet. A violinist drifted between tables playing something classical that probably cost extra just to have him stand there. And every table had candles burning inside glass lanterns that gave the whole place a golden, cinematic glow. I was 35, wearing my best suit, the one I pulled out for weddings, job interviews, and the occasional anniversary dinner. Across from me sat my fiancée, Olivia, 32. Her long auburn hair styled in waves that framed her sharp cheekbones and green eyes. She wore a deep red dress that probably came straight from a designer boutique on Michigan Avenue. She had that air about her, the one that told you she had arrived at the top of her game, and she wanted everyone to know it. It was supposed to be her night. Her tech company had just gone public. Her IPO had blown past projections, and she was riding high. She'd been on the phone all week with investors, journalists, and congratulatory friends. I figured we were here to toast her success, maybe talk about a trip, maybe even discuss the wedding details we kept putting off. The waiter had just set down a bottle of wine Olivia insisted on picking. A Bordeaux with a name I couldn't pronounce, but that cost more than my last car repair. And I thought, okay, this is her victory lap. Let her have it. But then she tightened her grip on my hand across the table, looked me straight in the face, and delivered her line. "I want a prenup. I'm not risking my future on you." The words hung in the air, sharper than the silver cutlery resting on white linen. I actually coughed, half choking on the bread I'd just bitten into, spraying crumbs and water in a very unromantic display. Olivia didn't flinch. She leaned back in her chair like a CEO delivering news to an employee about to be downsized. I caught the eyes of the couple at the next table, who quickly looked away, but not before exchanging that silent look people give when they're watching a train wreck in real time. Inside, I felt a surge of heat. Not embarrassment, not sadness, but something colder. Everyone expected me to argue, to protest, maybe storm out. Instead, I wiped my mouth with the cloth napkin, smiled, and said, "Smart thinking." My tone was light, almost cheerful, like she just suggested trying the chef's special. Her eyebrows twitched, confusion flashing for just a moment, but she recovered quickly, sipping her wine with the confidence of someone who thought she'd just secured her future. The rest of the dinner turned into a monologue. Olivia explained how her legal team had already prepared a draft agreement. She talked about asset protection, liability waivers, spousal limitations, all in the same tone she'd used to present a quarterly report. The violinist played something romantic, but in my ears it sounded like the soundtrack to a courtroom drama. I nodded, made the right noises, let her think she was dazzling me with her brilliance. The truth was, I wasn't upset. I wasn't even surprised. I'd seen this coming, though not quite so publicly, not quite so dramatically. By the time dessert arrived, a chocolate soufflé that collapsed when you tapped it with a spoon, she was practically glowing with satisfaction. She thought she'd taken the power seat in our relationship, that she had drawn the line and I had meekly agreed. But here's the thing. When someone underestimates you, when they look at you and see only what they want to see, they reveal more about themselves than they do about you. Olivia saw me as the supportive but secondary partner, the man lucky enough to have her, the man who should sign whatever paper she slid across the table just for the privilege of standing beside her. I paid the bill that night, sliding my card across the table before she could pull out hers. She didn't argue, probably because she thought I was trying to prove I could handle at least that much. We walked out onto the rooftop terrace where the city lights spread endlessly beneath us. She slipped her arm through mine, kissed my cheek, and whispered, "This is for the best, you'll see." I smiled, held her close, and let the moment linger, because sometimes silence is louder than any argument. When I got home later, my phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer, Ethan Price, a man I trusted for years. "Heard the news. Let's meet tomorrow. Bring coffee. This is going to be fun." I stared at that message, sitting in my modest apartment with its second-hand furniture and flickering lamp, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger, not fear, anticipation. The next morning, I walked into Ethan's office with 2 cups of strong black coffee and a smile that probably looked way too calm for a man supposedly on the verge of signing away his future. His office was downtown, one of those high-rise towers with polished marble lobbies where even the security guards looked like they made 6 figures. I rode the elevator up to the 24th floor, staring at my reflection in the mirrored walls. I was wearing my usual work clothes, a simple button-down and slacks, the same outfit I'd worn for years as a consultant. Nothing flashy, nothing expensive, just ordinary. And that was exactly how I wanted it. Ethan greeted me with that sharp grin he always had, the one that said he'd already read the battlefield before the war even started. He was in his early 40s, sharp suit, clean cut, the kind of man who could convince a jury that up was down if he wanted to. His office was filled with shelves of thick legal books, but I knew he barely cracked them anymore. He didn't need to. He lived and breathed the law, and more importantly, he loved a good fight. "She dropped it on you, didn't she?" he said, sliding one of the coffees toward himself and opening his laptop. "Prenup at a rooftop dinner. Classy." I chuckled. "In front of half the city, basically." She didn't even flinch. Ethan leaned back in his chair. "Olivia thinks she's protecting herself. What she doesn't realize is she's walking right into something she won't be able to walk back from. So tell me, Marcus, how do you want to play this?" I sat there for a moment, staring at the city skyline through the window. Cars looked like toys crawling along the streets far below, and the river shimmered in the sunlight. I thought about Olivia, about her perfect red dress, her perfect posture, her perfect confidence. She was used to calling the shots. She was used to winning, and she was used to everyone around her bending the knee to her demands. I took a sip of coffee, leaned forward, and said quietly, "I want you to write one too." Ethan's grin widened. "Now we're talking." He cracked his knuckles and began typing. The sound of his keyboard was sharp and fast, like the opening beats of a drum line before a battle. He asked me questions, detailed ones, about every asset I owned, every investment, every property, every account. He didn't blink when I laid out numbers that would make most people's heads spin. He just kept typing, nodding, occasionally raising an eyebrow when something particularly large came up. "You've done well hiding this," he said at one point. "Most people couldn't resist showing off at least a little." I shrugged. "That's why it worked. Everyone sees what they want to see." When we finished, he leaned back, steepling his fingers. "So Olivia wants protection. She'll get protection. But she's not going to like what it looks like." He slid the draft across to me, already printed and bound. It was thick, meticulous, and ironclad. It didn't just protect my assets. It made it clear that in the event of divorce, she would walk away with nothing she hadn't brought in herself. Ethan had woven in clauses so tight you could barely slip a piece of paper through them. Reading it felt like watching a magician pull off a trick you couldn't quite believe was possible. Only this trick was very real. I left his office with the binder under my arm, feeling the weight of it in more ways than one. On the street below, life went on as usual. People hurrying to work, honking cars, tourists snapping photos of buildings they couldn't name. None of them had any idea what was about to unfold in my life. To them, I was just another face in the crowd, another guy in slacks and a shirt with a binder tucked under his arm. But inside, I felt a calm certainty I hadn't felt in years. That evening, Olivia came by my apartment unannounced, striding in like she owned the place. She was still glowing from her IPO victory, still radiating that untouchable energy. She kissed me on the cheek, sat on my couch, and said, "I'm glad you're being mature about this whole prenup thing. Most men would be offended. But you get it." I smiled faintly, watching her talk. She launched into a speech about how important it was to set boundaries, how marriage was both love and business, how she was only protecting the future we were supposed to be building together. I let her finish. Then I said softly, "Funny you should say that. I had one drafted too." The look on her face was something I'll never forget. It was subtle, just a flicker, but it was there. Her confident smile froze for a fraction of a second. Her eyes widened just slightly before she pulled it back together. "Oh," she said, voice carefully even. You drafted one?" I nodded. "Of course. Marriage is a partnership, and partnerships need clarity. I thought you'd appreciate that." She gave a little laugh, but it was brittle, not the natural laugh she used when she was genuinely amused. "Well, I suppose that makes sense," she said, crossing her legs and adjusting her blouse. But I could see it. Behind the practiced smile, behind the perfectly calm tone, there was something else creeping in, something she wasn't used to feeling: unease. The rest of the evening passed in a strange quiet. She talked about her work, her company, her endless meetings. I listened, nodded, played the role she expected me to play. But every now and then, I caught her glancing at the binder sitting on my desk. She tried not to look at it, but her eyes always went back, like it was a loaded gun sitting in the room. Later, when she left, she kissed me quickly and said she had an early meeting. I watched her walk down the hall, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. And when the door closed, I sat back in my chair, staring at that binder. Olivia thought she had drawn the lines of the battlefield. She thought she was 2 moves ahead. What she didn't realize was that the board looked very different from my side of the table. The days that followed felt like the calm before a storm, the kind of silence that makes you suspicious because it's too perfect. Olivia carried on as though nothing had shifted between us. She still sent me cheerful texts about her meetings. She still posted glowing updates online about her company. She still kissed me lightly on the cheek when we met for dinner. But under the surface, I could feel the change. It was in the way she lingered a little too long near the binder on my desk, the way her eyes darted away when I caught her staring. It was in the pauses between her sentences, tiny hesitations that never used to be there. She was rattled, though she'd never admit it, and that was all I needed. One evening she invited me to a gala at the Art Institute, one of those charity events where the tickets cost more than most people's rent and the guests pretended they cared about the cause while really just networking. I put on my suit and played the part, smiling politely, shaking hands, listening to conversations about hedge funds and venture capital like I was supposed to be impressed. Olivia was in her element, dressed in a midnight blue gown, diamonds at her ears, moving through the crowd with the grace of a queen surveying her court. People gravitated toward her, laughing at her jokes, congratulating her on her company's success, telling her how inspiring she was. I stood at her side, the supportive fiancé, smiling when appropriate, nodding when necessary. But I watched her carefully, the way a hunter watches his prey. At one point in the evening, while she was busy talking to a senator's wife, I slipped away to the bar. A man I didn't recognize approached me, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of handshake that said he was used to closing deals. He introduced himself as Daniel Royce, one of the bigger investors in Olivia's company. He leaned in close, his voice low, casual but sharp. "She's impressive, isn't she?" he said, nodding toward Olivia. "Sharp mind, sharper tongue. You're a lucky man." I gave a polite smile. "I know." He sipped his drink, then glanced at me again. "I also know she's pushing for that prenup. She told us at dinner last week. Said it was just a formality, that you'd sign without hesitation." He paused, watching my reaction. I held his gaze, my smile never wavering. "Smart of her to be cautious," I said evenly. Royce chuckled, swirling the ice in his glass. "Cautious, yes, but sometimes caution hides fear. Don't forget that." And then he walked away, leaving me with his words hanging in the air like smoke. Later that night, as Olivia and I drove home in the back of her Blacktown car, she was unusually quiet. She stared out the window at the passing city lights, her reflection flickering in the glass. Finally, she spoke. "Did you enjoy yourself tonight?" Her tone was light, almost casual, but I could hear the edge beneath it. It was fine, I said. You seemed to enjoy it. She turned to look at me then, her green eyes sharp even in the dim light. You didn't talk much. People noticed. I shrugged. I wasn't there for them. She studied me for a moment, then looked away again. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. The following morning, I found her in my apartment, standing at my desk with the binder open in front of her. She jumped when I walked in, slamming it shut like a guilty teenager caught with a diary. I was just curious, she said quickly, her voice a little too high, her movements a little too fast. I didn't raise my voice, didn't accuse her. I just walked past her, picked up the binder, and set it back in the drawer. Curiosity can be dangerous, I said quietly. She bit her lip, said nothing, and left the room. That was the moment I knew I had her. Not because she was scared of me, but because she was scared of what she didn't know. The unknown is more powerful than any weapon. She didn't know what was in that document. She didn't know how much I had hidden, and she didn't know how much I was willing to fight. And the more she tried to pry, the more control she handed me without even realizing it. Days turned into weeks, and the tension between us became the unspoken third party in every conversation. When we went out, people saw the polished couple, the rising star and her loyal fiancé. But behind closed doors, every smile was laced with suspicion, every gesture loaded with meaning. She started testing me in small ways, dropping comments about her lawyers, asking casual questions about my finances, even hinting at old girlfriends just to see if I'd react. I didn't take the bait. I stayed calm, stayed steady, stayed silent when silence was more powerful than words. One night, she finally snapped. We were having dinner at her penthouse. The city spread out like a glittering map below us. Halfway through the meal, she slammed her glass down, wine spilling across the tablecloth. "What are you hiding from me, Marcus?" she demanded, her voice sharp, her eyes blazing. I set down my fork, looked at her calmly, and said, "Nothing you don't already suspect." She froze, her lips parting as if to argue, but no words came out. She just stared at me, breathing hard, before pushing her chair back and storming out of the room. I sat there alone, the city lights flickering in the distance, the taste of cold steak in my mouth, and I realized something. Olivia wasn't the enemy I thought she was. She was her own worst enemy. Her ambition, her arrogance, her fear. They were tearing her apart from the inside. All I had to do was stand still and let her unravel. The morning after her outburst, the air in her penthouse was so thick I could almost see it. Olivia didn't speak to me as she brewed her coffee, didn't even glance in my direction. She stood by the window, the skyline blazing behind her, one hand holding the cup, the other tapping her phone. I sat at the counter, watching her in silence, reading every twitch in her shoulders, every pause in her typing. When she finally spoke, her voice was clipped and businesslike. "My lawyers want to meet next week. We'll finalize everything then." I nodded once, not breaking eye contact. "Perfect. I'll bring mine." She froze for half a second, the tiniest flicker in her mask, then forced a smile. "Of course." The rest of the week was a strange kind of theater. Out in public, we were flawless, smiling, laughing, the picture of a couple on the rise. Her friends adored me, her colleagues respected me. Strangers thought we belonged on magazine covers. But behind closed doors, every conversation was a negotiation, every look a calculation. I could feel her studying me, weighing each word, waiting for a crack to show. But I had none to give. That binder had become more than paper and ink. It was a shadow in the room, a reminder that she didn't control the board as completely as she believed. The day of the meeting arrived. Ethan and I walked into the downtown law offices where Olivia's team had gathered. The place smelled of leather, paper, and money, with glass walls and polished wood floors that echoed our footsteps. Olivia was already there, sitting at the head of a long mahogany table, flanked by two attorneys in tailored suits. She looked radiant as always, hair perfectly styled, a sharp black dress, heels that clicked like gunfire when she stood to greet us. Her smile was dazzling, but her eyes were tight, cold. She extended her hand to Ethan first, ignoring me, a power move meant to sting. He just smirked and shook it, unfazed. We sat. Papers shuffled, laptops opened, pens clicked. Olivia's lead attorney, a man named Gallagher, silver hair and a smug grin, slid a thick folder across the table. "This is the agreement," he said. "As you'll see, it's straightforward, standard in cases such as this. Protects Olivia's assets, ensures clarity for both parties. We'll need Marcus's signature today to move forward." Ethan glanced at me, then opened the folder. He flipped through a few pages, his eyes moving quickly, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he pulled out our binder and set it on the table with a heavy thud. The sound echoed in the room. Olivia's smile faltered. Gallagher frowned, reaching for it. "And this is..." Ethan leaned back in his chair, lacing his fingers together. "Marcus's agreement. We thought it only fair that if Olivia wants protection, Marcus should have the same." Olivia's jaw tightened, but she stayed silent. Gallagher opened the binder, scanning the pages, his frown deepening with each line. This isn't standard," he said finally, his voice tighter now. "This is excessive." Ethan smiled thinly. "No, this is thorough." The room went still. Olivia's other attorney shifted uncomfortably in his seat, shooting her a sideways glance. She finally spoke, her voice low, clipped. "Why would you need this, Marcus? You don't have anything to protect." Her words were a knife meant to cut, meant to remind me of my place in her narrative. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table, and locked eyes with her. "You'd be surprised what I have." For the first time since I'd known her, Olivia blinked. It was slight, almost imperceptible, but it was there, the crack in her armor. Gallagher cleared his throat, flipping through more pages, clearly trying to regain control of the meeting. "This is highly unusual," he muttered. "We'll need time to review." Ethan nodded. "Take all the time you need. But Marcus won't be signing anything until both agreements are considered equally." The rest of the meeting was nothing but smoke. Olivia's team tried to push, to pressure, to spin. Ethan deflected every argument with surgical precision. I barely spoke, only chimed in when necessary, letting silence do the work. By the time we left, the air around Olivia was practically vibrating with tension. She stood by the window as we packed up, her back to us, her reflection in the glass cold and distant. She didn't say goodbye. Outside, the city was bright with afternoon sun, people bustling on the sidewalks, horns blaring in the distance. Ethan clapped me on the shoulder, grinning. "She didn't expect that. You just flipped the game." I didn't answer right away. I watched the traffic crawl by, the sunlight gleaming off glass towers, and thought about Olivia standing in that room, her confidence finally dented. For years, she'd been the one with the leverage, the one pulling the strings. Now, for the first time, she was off balance. And nothing unsettled her more than not knowing where the ground was. That night, she called me. Her voice was calm, almost sweet, but I could hear the strain underneath. "Marcus," she said, "I think we've both been too aggressive. Let's just talk this out, just you and me. No lawyers, no games." I let the silence stretch, long enough for her to start shifting in her seat on the other end of the line. Then I said softly, "Sure, we'll talk. Tomorrow." And I hung up. As I sat there in the quiet of my apartment, the city lights glowing through the window, I realized the balance had shifted. She had played her move bold and public. I had answered, quiet and precise. The game wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time, I wasn't just surviving it. I was steering it.